Okay, so we're going to listen, if you like, to another one of my fairy tales or fables or nursery rhymes, if you like, because I like fairy tales and nursery rhymes and anything that is not real, fictitious, and out of the ordinary. But I also like the old tales that I knew when I was younger. Some I'm only fleetingly familiar with. And this fable that I'm going to make up as I go along, as best as I can, and try to make it into something that has some relevance, because all fairy tales usually have some relevance. You know, they may not be true, but they might be trying to get an idea across, or some sort of thought, whatever, but it doesn't matter. Now, this one I have done before, but I'm going to do it again. And it's essentially my fairy tale or idea on, and it's not an idea, it is just what I'm making up really, but it is going back to the very beginning. Well, not back to the very beginning, but back to a beginning as we would imagine it maybe, because we only really have our imagination in this reality. We only have what we've been told, the fairy tales we've been told. There's some truths, some that are not true, this and that. And, you know, we have our histories that we think are a real history, and then we have our histories that we think are like myth. I think they call it mythology. I'm not very familiar with the real history or the mythology. But over the last 12 months, I've tried to take a little bit of an interest due to seeing the real world, the so-called real world, which is really the Matrix video game world that I now think we live in, and certainly that I play it anyway, reluctantly. And even that is like a negative fairy tale, because you can have fairy tales, you can have histories and things that are positive, and some are more negative. You know, Cinderella isn't always going to get the handsome prince and live happily ever after in reality. In fact, that is a distant reality, but it may be for some, of course. That depends on, like I say, if you are of the Matrix, the world is different to those that are not of the Matrix. The Matrix is the earth, because, some are players that play for the Matrix, and therefore their world is slightly more pleasant, more pretty. But if you are not playing for the Matrix, then you are the player that doesn't know you're playing. And you're like, so you are like Alice in Wonderland. And that is the idea, because that is the fun of the game for the Matrix, you see, because otherwise it's no fun for them. If you knew what the next move was, or what the game was, or what the next illusion was going to be in the reality, then there would be, there wouldn't be no element of surprise and no fun. But either way, I'm rambling off. This is not what the video is about. This is about a total fable of going back right into the past. This applies to now only in the sense that in my fairy tale world, and how I would see the God entity that is the master director of this Matrix Earth world we live in. This God entity being has been around for a long, 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 long time. And that's why I'm going back to the beginning, right back to the very beginning of what we know. Maybe not to the beginning of time, no, because that could be, who knows. But you have to assume that there was, at the beginning, a creative force. Human beings are, as I've said, their thinking creates a reality. So they are little creator beings in themselves if they are in the right environment with the right frequency and vibration, and are in a natural world, but they are in a matrix, so they are not creators or creative beings in any true sense, because the matrix is the controlling force. The matrix is already set up to make me behave a certain way. So I don't behave randomly or naturally create. And also it's a low frequency earth, so therefore the vibration is low. Therefore my vibration is low, and has to be low in order to stay in this reality, because they want me and you to stay in this reality. And that, of course, is whether you want to or not, because obviously someone like me that likes fairy tales and fantasies and prefers Cinderella to Hansel and Gretel, or doesn't particularly enjoys watching a horror movie but doesn't want to be in one. So therefore, some of us stay here against our will, whereas others voluntarily enjoy it because that frequency suits them. They like the dark reality. They like the dark prince, the dark god entity, and this is because they vibrate at that same frequency, and that world is their world that they enjoy, whereas some might prefer a slightly higher vibration, but maybe subconsciously, the vibration has still been low over a lifetime. So therefore, I guess, myself, I'm still here. So I would imagine that at some level, you are a consenting player. But I don't feel that's the case. And I know that I don't like playing games because I don't have a sporting bone much in my body. So therefore, it does seem a contradiction. But who knows? Because we are under such mind confusion and delusion in this world that we wouldn't really know. And also things have changed too. That's another thing too, because if you've been here for a long time and lived long, circumstances change. So what might have been once a bit more acceptable might now be totally unacceptable too, because and human beings change too. As I've said before, the human beings that are now on this earth are different to what was around many years ago. At least that's what I think, but it is the case that they are different to what I would have thought, because they are of a darker energy. They're not that they are, they are of the psychopathic kind of variety, which is really a mental illness and really is being out of balance and not technically logical, rational or sane, really. But that is the new norm. You see, whatever is the norm is the norm. Whatever is the majority is regarded as the norm. So it doesn't, in fact, I was told this even years and years ago. There really is no normal. It's just what the general consensus accepts and says is the norm, or what is acceptable, or what is sane almost. I personally do not agree with this. I think there is a sane normalcy, really, regardless of what the majority consensus is. I say that only because, I think that there is. But on the other hand, there is no point in me saying that if the vast majority are of a different mindset and have changed their being into something different. In other words, they don't think the same way as other limited numbers of humans do think. They don't think that it is they may even think that it is superior and better and more desirable to be less human, to be more of the dark, negative energy variety, and to not relate to other human beings, to just be totally self-serving, which that's fair enough. I don't actually disagree with a lot of these things in the sense because, I'm not that much from that myself. But there's a difference between, as I've said before, being self-serving and trying to survive in yourself as opposed to destroying another to accomplish that. That is the difference, because I wouldn't consider myself an unselfish person. But at the same time, I don't need other people. I don't need it. It is a need in a way, right or wrong. It's a need for some beings and some humans that are of the psychopathic type of variety. It's a need because they have let themselves go into that mindset. They have let the mind parasites that become possessed, as I've said, and and we're all possessed. It's only the degree, as I've said before, because this is a negative realm. That might sound funny to some people, although that's only because most people don't acknowledge this. They know it's true in themselves, but they tend to think that most other people are probably not as negative, so they camouflage it up. Which is another thing with this world too. This reality is definitely. I was going to use the title of the video. It just come to me a few hours ago. Pinocchio's world. We live in Pinocchio's world. Pinocchio lied and lied and lied, and his nose got longer and longer and longer. And basically, Pinocchio had to cover up what he was. So he was prepared to lie, as children often are, to impress or to create the world they want. And at any rate, I've gone off the track again. We're supposed to be going back to the beginning, but Pinocchio is a part of this beginning. Even though I know I'm going to muddle this story up, I can sense it before I start. I have these good little ideas, but they don't materialise in the video most of the time. I don't get it across. I'm sorry for that, but anyway, I'll try. I'll do my whatever. Now, at the beginning, I shouldn't say at the beginning, but before this earth was created, not this earth that we are now in, this matrix earth. No, I would have to say not this matrix earth, but if you want to stick with the earth being a totally natural realm as it is now, that's fair enough, because, it could be. I don't think it is, but it could be. But either way, it's not the Garden of Eden, is it? No. So, and of course the Garden of Eden would have only been a part of the earth anyway, I suppose. This is what I'm told recently. Whereas I suppose I just thought it was the whole caboodle, if you know what I mean. But it makes no difference either way, because I suppose Adam and Eve would not have ventured too far away from the better part of it, I suppose. I've gone off again. Got to keep to the point. Okay, so at some point in time, right, there was a creative force, the very essence of creation. Many people would put a name on this. Most people say God. But I do not do that because there are so many gods. Each person has their own view of what God is. They might call it a particular name, all this sort of thing, and I don't honestly know. But, I would use names in this video, in this fairy tale, because it's a fairy tale, and in fairy tales you have to try to use names. But, at any rate, there's a creative force, a God, a being that is the central creation and has the ability to create anything it wants. This being is in heaven. We say heaven, but this is just the realm. This is just the space. I don't know because I'm not a scientist or knowledgeable on these things. But it's all a fairy tale and a bit of a illusion anyway. But we're assuming it to be real. And I personally do believe in reality, even though I say that we create reality with our thinking and this sort of thing. But it's still real. It's just that some might be more real than others. And some might only be, I think, a portion of the reality. So therefore we're kind of living in an illusion because we don't really know the full picture. We don't know, what's going on. We are in a box, and that box is just nothing, but we think it's the all. So that's really the main illusion, I would think, of it. Not that it's not real, but that it's only a very small part of reality, if you want to look at it that way. But it's all one big fairy tale anyway, so take it with a grain of salt, as I say, if you like, And at any rate, this creator being was in heaven. That was the domain. And there were other beings there with the creator being, or God, the original, okay? The most supreme one, if you like to put it that way. I can't use these descriptions very well. I wish I had better descriptive words, especially as it's a fairy tale. But in this realm, heaven, if you like, because it was obviously the best place and the centre of creation, there were other beings too. So this is not the beginning of all, but who knows what or that would be, because we don't even know what my fairy tale is. So it's just a fairy tale, but it's relevant to now, because one of the beings that was in heaven is the being that is the God entity of this earth matrix that we live in now. This being was in heaven with the creator God entity that created this being. This being was the second most high in heaven at the time. This being was created as Pinocchio was created by his master or what he thought was his father, but it was not his father in a true sense, because he was created out of wood, out of a different material to the master or the father. And Pinocchio was special to the master and to the father, but Pinocchio himself was not happy with that. But this is me confusing the story by putting two fairy tales in one. By putting the story of Pinocchio, which I can barely remember anyway, and I'm just going to make it up. So if I get it wrong according to the original written fables, I'm sorry, but these videos are not for that. You know, they are just, I will just use any bit from anywhere that suits me for my fairy tale, because it's a fairy tale, so I can do that. Doesn't have to be true, doesn't have to be accurate, doesn't have to, you know, I could pull it even from another source if I choose to. So if you don't like that sort of fairy tale, if you like your fairy tales to be based on the authentic fairy tales, well then you don't need to listen to mine, because they will appear to be stupid and you might even not like them. Well, that's fair enough, because I don't like a lot of the fairy tales that I do anyway, and I don't like all the fairy tales I read when I was a kid, you know. And they all had negative connotations. In most of them, even the ones that had happy endings, they always had negative characters as well as positive ones, didn't they? They always had the wicked stepsisters in Cinderella, you know, who were basically always working against her to make her life a misery and to make her less than what she was, if you want to look at it that way, and certainly were riddled with jealousy and hatred against her. Which also is very similar to Pinocchio and to this tale in a way. Because envy and jealousy and dislike and feeling rejection, etc., all these things, which are negative things really, but we all experience them, and they can become, yes, part of the mind parasites, part of possession, to where they take you over, and then you act accordingly on the jealousy, the envy and the negativity, and you create havoc in this world. And you are essentially setting yourself up, or are being set up, if you want to look at it that way, by the mind parasite, which comes from the Matrix, to make you destructive as opposed to creative. Because, you know, we come from a creative source, not a destructive source, but the Matrix is all negative. The Matrix comes from a destructive source. And getting back to the fable, this offers a fairy tale take on why the Matrix is negative as opposed to creative and positive. Sure, it creates, but it doesn't create in favour of the human. It creates in favour of its own kind, of the Matrix, which is a low-frequency, anti-human, negative vibration, whereas humans are meant to be, even though we are now not, a high-frequency, creative force or being, depending on, you know, because I don't know, I'm just trying to be fancy here and use what appears to be intelligent descriptions of things which, as you well know, I know nothing about really, or so little that it's laughable. But, you know, this is what I offer, and, you know, some people can fill in all the gaps really well. Others probably won't listen because they won't want to fill in the gaps, or will not know how to, because it's, you know, you do have to accept certain basic premises, and if you don't, then, you know, it's not for you, which I understand, because it hasn't always been for me. In fact, it still isn't for me. It's just that I accept certain fairy tales to be closer to reality than what some people might think, but that's like everything else, isn't it, you know? each person has their own way of looking at the real world. So for some people the glass is half full, and for others it's half empty. Etc. Any rate, back to the beginning again. I'm making very slow progress of what should be a short story, as usual, but I'm trying to get it right because I find it a fascinating tale at the least, and one that I have never really been familiar with till very, very recently, after a lifetime. Was not even aware practically, even at the level that most people would perhaps know a bit more. And now I have actually got the idea to make a video on it. Isn't that strange? Yeah. It's not really confidence. But it feels as though I'm overplaying my hand or overstepping my information and knowledge. It does. But that's why I say take it lightly, because that's if you are serious about these types of subjects. Because some people take some of these things to be real, and some people say, like me, it's just meant to be a fantasy. But, but at any rate, the Creator had in heaven other beings, but another being that had been created by the Creator, and this being was not like the Creator, but very revered, very accomplished in many ways. And the Creator was extremely proud of the creation of this being. And all admired this being. But the being knew that it was different to the Creator. But because so many admired this being and looked up to this being, as the Creator did also, because the Creator also exalted this being. A bit like, this is my child. But it wasn't the Creator's child. It was a separate creation. It was of the mind of the Creator, but not the essence of the Creator. It was a separate entity. It was like Pinocchio. Pinocchio was the master's little boy, but he was made of wood. He was artificial in comparison with the master. The father that created Pinocchio saw Pinocchio as his son in a way, but it was not of his flesh. It was separately created with his hand from his mind, out of wood, out of a different substance to the master, to the father, to Pinocchio's father in the old fable, as I recall. But it doesn't matter if I've got it wrong, okay? And this was like this being in a way. But others admired this being, and the Creator greatly admired and exalted the being. And the being itself actually knew that it was different to the Creator, but because it was admired so greatly and was different to the Creator, may have even been more beautiful in a funny kind of way, or certainly more fascinating and more interesting, maybe. Who knows? Could I create something more beautiful than myself, more interesting? Well, probably, but it would still be like a painting, for instance. You could do a self-portrait and you could glamorise yourself no end, you know, or maybe do it to when you were a lot younger or something like that, whatever. But it doesn't have to be, it's a representation. So this being was a representation of the Creator, but it was not of the Creator. I'm not putting this very well at all, I can see that. And if I've lost you, I'm not surprised. But the few that listen must be very patient and very kindly in, for this. But like I said, the singer, not the song, like I said in the other one, I'm not a very good singer. Even if the song was good, I really don't sing it too well. That's not my skill, you see. I'm not saying that it couldn't be or shouldn't have been, but under the circumstances, it just isn't. And it's like I don't want to be singing a song because it's a song it's not a happy song in a way. But anyway, we have the Creator being of all, the central source of creation, and has created another being. There are others too, many others. Don't ask me where they all come from. I'm getting confused myself because these are not things I'm familiar with, but I'm trying to keep it simple. So this being, because he was so revered and so admired and so looked up to by the Creator God itself and by all others, actually saw itself as a separate entity and godlike in itself. And because it was even more admired in some ways than the God, it secretly believed that it was the God, and saw no reason why it shouldn't be, in a way. But it was happy. It was happy in its position because, it was in heaven, all admired, and there was no problems, and was happy to even serve the Creator God in a way. I do not know what all this serving and stuff would have amounted to or what it was. I have no idea. But either way, everything was all hunky-dory, as they say, for a long, long time. Then one day, the Creator God decided to create again. But this time decided to create something more like itself, or a closer representation of itself, and to give this being more of its own abilities. Make it from a similar type of spirit, shall we say, and where the body is connected more to the spirit. Now, see, I'm losing my own thought here, because I'm wondering how much spirit the other being had. But I'm guessing that it was a different being, less of a spirit, more of a physical. Now, human beings also are physical, but is this because we are in the low vibration, very dense, spiritually physical world because of that we have changed. Because everything changes, you see. That's what I'm saying. Beings can change, the world can change, the earth can change. We're well aware of that. You could have trees one minute and a desert the next, you know. Not obviously not in the blink of an eye, you would probably say, but it does happen. And some people call this evolution, but my story does not have anything to do with real evolution because it's a fairy tale. Evolution doesn't exist in fairy tales because fairy tales are just of the thinking. So they just happen. You know, they don't... and it's all about creating. So it's not about something randomly evolving. Even low, one could say that if you create and then technically change something, that is a form of evolution. See, it would depend on your perception, and all this goes beyond my perception and comprehension, so I'm just being fancy by saying that. But I would imagine, if I think about it, because I've heard so many strange things in recent times, strange to me anyway, but then everything's strange to me now, you know, because I didn't think I was living in a matrix, you see. So obviously, you know, I would see things a lot different now. And if I know that other people are more into technology, or at least they think technology is science and technology is as much evolution as some organic thing just adapting to its circumstances or whatever. But hey, I don't fully understand that. I don't actually believe it. Personally, at this stage in my time, and, you know, I may as well stick with it, seeing I'm at the end of my time as opposed to the start, you know, I don't think that human beings evolve. I think, you know, like in the fairy tale that I come from, it's the same as technology, except that technology can be changed and modified all the time. I don't know what I'm talking about here, I know. But I think that if a human being was created with everything already there, as I've said before, then there is no need to add technology. Technology is a different thing because it already is the perfect, even if you wanted to say there was technological aspect, then it's already the most complete technological thing because it is created from the original source of creation. So it can't be bettered, you know, because you can't better a source of creation, can you? You might, like Pinocchio, aspire to be human when you're really a wooden boy, and you might lie to accomplish that, as Pinocchio did, because he didn't accept what he was. And maybe if he hadn't have seen other real little boys, he wouldn't have felt that way. I mean, it wasn't like his father or his master made him feel that way. He loved him, was proud of his creation. But, you know, it's like that. Sometimes a being can have that, comes into them. I think in the original story they say iniquity was found in this being, that all was good until iniquity was found in it. And that iniquity was envy. That iniquity was envy, rightly or wrongly, because, you know, to me it was wrong in the sense that there was no need for it, because if you are exalted to almost the Most High, and if you are revered and admired, and you have it all, you know, it is foolish to look at something that is different to you, even if that is your creator, and feel that you should be in that position when you in a funny kind of way already are. But that's why it's iniquity, because it was an unnecessary need to be the number one. That kind of, and we have this in the world. We have this thing that is a representation of this. This is why humans are in the pickle that they have been in for a long time, because we're all inflicted with this envy and this mind parasite that makes us feel we have to compete and destroy others, because it just eats at us, as it did Pinocchio and this being at some point. But essentially this story is longer than that, because while this being was in heaven with the creator God Source and other beings, and was greatly admired and was really second to none except the original Source, it actually was reasonably happy. And why wouldn't it be? Because many admired it more than the God Source even. So, and the God Source itself admired it no end, put it in that position, looked up to it, said this is my finest creation, but then one day decided to create a realm, a different realm, and place a being in that was a more organic human being, that was like giving a piece of the DNA, if you like. I'm making this up because I do not know anything about DNA or any of these things, but it's a fairy tale, so I'm going with it, and it's just, you might be able to make a reality out of it. You might say, well, she doesn't know what she's talking about, and that's true, but you might still be able to make it into a more realistic fable, and maybe not a fable, because mine is a fable. But, in other words, there may be some little elements of reality in fairy tales, as there always is. Even fairy tales always have some reality to them. It's just that the whole thing is regarded as false, a fairy tale, an imagination. But our thought creates reality, so imagination, I think, is, as much of this reality as anything else. But, it's just that that's not how everyone sees it. And, but at any rate, gone off the track again. So, the God Source Creator decided to make a realm, a separate realm from heaven, which we would now call Earth, but it was probably different to what it is now. Like I say, this is not, in the fairy tale, this is not the original Earth, okay? This Earth now is the Earth matrix. It is the realm of the second to none God, the second to none being that was in heaven. So it's another realm altogether, because this being has created its own heaven, or hell, depending on how you look at it, because it's regarded as hell by the Creator Source, because it's different to the original Earth, and it's low frequency, whereas the original was meant to be high frequency. So it's a different realm, you see. It's a dark realm, or a light realm, depending on which way you look at it. Because we're in a reverse world, and I'm bringing reality in here, but hey, that's a matter of opinion too, but we're in a reverse world, so therefore light is dark, and dark is light. And black is white, white is black. And this is only if you go back to the source, because everything is still what you are told and what you think is correct, or what you think is desirable, really. I would say what you think is best or desirable or beneficial. That's how I look at it. That's why I say some things are sane and some things aren't. Some things are logical and some things aren't. Some things are rational and some things aren't. Some things are practical and some things aren't. It's just to me that's just kind of like what is the most beneficial for a human being. But like I say, what is best for a human being, the God entity being that, that is the mastermind behind this Matrix video game Earth, that being is a different being. So its way of looking at black and white and right and wrong and good and bad is different to how a rational, normal human being of the original type would think is correct, shall we say. So that's like everything else, because if you're a snake, and you sting, bite to kill an animal for your sustenance, for you that is normal, but for its victim that is undesirable, not a benefit. So it's all your perception, depending on who you are, what your circumstances are, where you are in this matrix or where you are on the earth, and what species you are, whether you're a lion or an elephant or a cat or a dog or a deer or in all circumstances, as we know, with even the animal kingdom. There are some that are predators that prey on other animals. So that is normal for the predator to kill and to destroy another kind. It doesn't see that as negative. It doesn't see that as being dark or low frequency. But to the victim, to the deer that is killed by the lion, that is definitely low frequency, because they lose their life and they suffer but that's that didn't make any sense what I just said, so perhaps that should be deleted. But anyway, back to the Garden of Eden. We say the Garden of Eden because that's what a lot of people use. They call it the Garden of Eden, the beginning of the earth. They use that in various scenarios, which I'm not greatly familiar with, as you can well see. So please don't get upset if I'm not very accurate on any of those things. If you're a stickler for what you think, if you take it serious and it's a real truth, then, I will get a lot wrong. But at any rate, go back to the Garden of Eden, or back to the original earth, where the original creator that creates the all, shall we say, the number one creator, the source of creation, the original source of creation, if you'd like to look at it that way. Oh, it's very hard to use the right words or the right description even here. Decided to create another realm called Earth and place a new being in this realm, a being that was similar to the source, but also would be similar to the actual domain, the actual earth realm, all natural being, natural surroundings that was conducive, a high frequency zone, a high frequency realm. It was meant to be. So, this was Well, I'm just going to make this up, okay? So let's say there was water. There was water all around. There was water, large amount of water. The water became dense. The creator source took a straw and blew into the water and created a bubble. This bubble was to be the earth realm. Not sure where all the water all is and whatever, but it sounds good because a creator that is so vast and a source, this is just a small part of everything. So it's just a bit of fun. Just blow the bubble into the water and then we have a bubble air inside the bubble, and this was the creator's little earth. That's kind of what it is now, but I don't know if this was how it originally was. It may have been different. You know, we could be looking at a different thing, but I wouldn't think so, because we have to stick with the story. Once I get too over the top, got to keep it simple, so it doesn't matter if there's even any truth or none at all, because it's a story, it's a fairy tale, and, you know, we're going with that kind of thing. Now, the creator being created a being that was natural. The other being that was in heaven, that was second to none, this being was not 100% natural. This being was more like Pinocchio, but very beautiful and very interesting, different, not of the same as the source, or not created in that image, shall we say. At least this is the take. So I'm taking from different sources here because it's a fairy tale, okay? Now, and this will put two different worlds, if you want to look at it that way. You're looking at two different earths, you're looking at two different ideas of a creator and a god. Like I said, there are many gods, but essentially, because I'm a simplistic person and not too advanced at intellectual levels or even historical levels, much less mythology or any of this stuff, I keep it simple. So it doesn't matter if it, as I say, it doesn't matter if it's not accurate at all. But, you know, we keep with the two beings. We keep with the two gods only. One is the second highest God and the other is the highest God. Because one is the creator source and one is what is created. A bit like on this earth, like in my previous video where we create our own gods on this earth because we admire and worship many other so-called humans that we think have superior abilities and qualities to us, even though I've already mentioned that they really don't because we feed them. But that is not the point. They are still what you choose to be your idol or your god. Doesn't matter whether it's true or not. You can like Lulu the Archon spirit doll. She wasn't really a spirit at all, but I turned her into a spirit. I turned her into a little God because I put that admiration onto her, even though it was coming from me. I was taking from myself, belittling myself, and giving it to the doll. The doll became the better version of me, but in reality the doll did not exist at all. The doll was totally fictitious, was a piece of plastic. It was less than much less, but it was infused with that life, and I loved it. To some extent, yes, self-love in a way, but even not acknowledging that. But this is the whole thing. It's all about feeling good, and all this sort of thing is about us feeling good about ourselves, whether we worship something outside of ourselves or accept that that we should be comfortable with ourselves. We should not have to transform ourselves into something else or have an outside source. But this is not correct either, because we still might have come from somewhere, so there could still be a legitimate outside creator source. But while we're here, I think that we are meant to see ourselves as that. Because while we're in this realm, I would imagine we were meant to be the best. But not in this realm now that we're in now. No, because this is of the God entity, which is the second to none being. That is his realm now. So yes, so that is close to us. It's we are far from source, shall we say, but we are close to that God, and many people will see that God as the source, and for many it is the source, because we have Pinocchios on this earth. We have the masters and the fathers, but they create Pinocchio too. And then Pinocchio wants to be the real boy, so Pinocchio has to lie and lie to be the real boy. Pinocchio will do anything to be the real boy. I don't know what I'm talking about here. I've lost the thing. Go back to the Garden of Eden. Okay, so we've got the creator and the other being, and this creator source being decided to create again, and this time to blow a bubble into the world and create a realm, a totally natural realm, back then, not now, but back then. This is going back to the beginning of this so-called earth. But it's not the same earth that is now. But I keep going off onto that because if you want to take it that it is, but merely that the earth has changed a real lot, you can do that. That's okay. Because it's your fairy tale as much as mine. I just don't want to contradict some of my other videos, that's all, because it makes me look silly. But hey, I am, so it doesn't really matter. But I do try to keep it a little bit legitimate, even as fairy tales. But at any rate, the earth was made into, the God took a straw and blew a bubble into the water and said, that is the realm. That is a little realm that where I want to put a little version of myself and see how it goes. And so a being called Adam was created. I haven't given a name to the second to none non-human being that was in heaven with, because I don't know the names. I should give a name. I know I've done it before. But because some people take those things to be true, I prefer to leave it to your... But it makes it a difficult story if I don't have a name. Whereas I'm going to go with Adam because they say Adam was the first so-called human or man. Now, Adam was a complete being. He was created from the source creator as a complete being and plonked into the earth bubble realm. Only a bubble because it's an enclosed area. It's separate from the rest of so-called creation or whatever, I guess, And some say there are waters above. If you take that little bit of a text, which I've not studied these things, so I'm way off. But so therefore, air is like a bubble in water. But I'm sure I think people should look into these things. I only regret that I do not have the practical, physical stuff to back it up or to go with it or to even know it. But that's because we live not only in a bubble, but a closed mind bubble as well, because we don't know about our bubble. We don't really know about our earth. We don't really know about the matrix. Even I only see it because of observation and because I see it as a distinct mind system where it is a consciousness of beings that are the matrix disciples of the God entity, which is the force behind the matrix, which is the matrix really. Its disciples are its representations here on earth. When you worship the matrix disciple or the matrix idol, that is the indirect way you're worshipping the God entity, because most of us don't have direct contact with that supreme being that that is the force behind the matrix. Of course, the original Earth, this was not the case. This is where I'm getting. This is how the story of this came about, because originally there was the Adam, and he was on the Earth. If you want to say it's a matrix back then, you can. If you want to say, like me, that it was an organic, totally natural Earth, that's okay. Or if you want to say it's half-half, like many people think it is now. Who knows what it really is? But either way, you know my take on that, but it doesn't matter because you could have your own take. The Adam was placed in the Earth natural matrix or natural bubble or natural realm, depending on, how you see it. How physical or how mystical you want to go is another thing. I'm trying to keep it physical and real here for the story as a fairy tale, even though it's a fairy tale. Because we believe in the real world. Even though the real world is probably just what we're told, just atoms that are either far apart or brought together. I don't understand this sort of stuff, but I do get that. It just depends on that we don't see the space because we're limited. I can't see the space between everything. I can't move between the space. Should we be able to? Should our mind be able to part the atoms? Probably, but we can't. I can't, But that's only because we're limited, because that is the realm we're in, because it's a mind game realm as well as a physical game realm. It's mainly a mind game realm. Because if you can't do what you should be able to do, that is a mind control mind realm that is taken you over, because you only know what you're told, you only know what you believe to be true. And if you can't put it into practice too, because the earth now is not a natural realm. So even if you realise this and you raise the vibration a bit, you're still going to be hard pressed to work up against the negative matrix, because a matrix is the video game. It wasn't a video game at the beginning when Adam was put on the earth. It wasn't a video game then. In fact, Adam would have had total dominion over the earth. He was given dominion over the earth. In fact, I think that goes back to the biblical type story of where he was given dominion over the earth. I think it actually says that. But as you can see, I'm ignorant. I've never read these things. I should have picked up those books that were in every hotel room and had a read. But of course, there again, I wasn't able to interpret them because they're not written in easy language. And if they convert that, then you will lose the original idea too. You only have to pass something down once and you lose a lot of the original. We all know that. If I tell my story, someone tells me, I get information from elsewhere, and at least I'm honest in telling you that I am making it up, because it doesn't come from one source, you see. Just because I believe my fairy tales doesn't mean you have to. But that's essentially what does happen in the real world, is we have a fairy tale or even a piece of history, and then someone tells it to someone else, and when they tell it, that's their interpretation. It's not going to be absolute word for word. Every time you pass something down, every generation, things get changed. And so in the end, you do have a totally different fairy tale, if you like. And sometimes it varies a little, sometimes it probably varies a real lot from the original source, But that's just the reality, and there's nothing you can do much about that. And that's why we're in a mind video game, because we don't have any direct connection to any source or any true reality, But at any rate, back to the fairy tale. Dear, it is hard it takes a lot of energy to even just talk in this reality, and it should be easy, But at any rate, I've lost my train of thought, you see. Adam was in the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden was a place on the earth matrix, or the original natural earth, which I prefer and believe in and fantasize about. Doesn't exist now, but I still hold on to that and will continue to, despite all evidence to the contrary, because there is a lot of evidence to the contrary. But at any rate, the Garden of Eden was, the best place for Adam to reside, because it offered him fruit for his pleasure and his nourishment, to keep him happy and his body satisfied. And he was in contact with all the animals and birds and everything else that was natural on the earth, and he had dominion over them and was allowed dominion over them, because they were, it wasn't like he was dominating them. And this is only my view, which is different to what the real world we have now, where we dominate every species and we control every species, even if we think we are kind to animals. that is kindness only from our perception, because we control this. Well, some humans control this matrix Earth. I don't think any do, but some that are of the matrix, if they allow the matrix into their psyche, shall we say, and they operate for the matrix, then they have control, more control over this Earth that we live on now. But back then it wasn't like that. And Adam was the sole human. But he was not alone. As I say, he had animals and birds and many other species, which he got on with greatly. They were his friends, his company. But he had none that was exactly the same species as himself. But at this time, he also did have the company of the second most high being. This being was in contact with Adam. In fact, Adam was this being's friend, even though this being was reluctant to accept the reality that the Creator Source had created another being and put him in a special realm, and saw that being as almost like a child, but a closer child. Let's just say it's the difference between the master creating Pinocchio as opposed to the master or the father actually conceiving a natural child out of his own body. If you want to look at it that way, that's taking it to the extreme, because hey, I don't know anything about creation of anything, not even my own kind. So, I know nothing at all at a physical, biological level. Totally ignorant, totally in the dark. So as you can see, it's a fairy tale. But that's putting it simplistically and very dramatically, just so that you can follow the fairy tale. The Adam, the human, that was the biological offspring, as opposed to the created technical Pinocchio-like being. Even though this being was regarded as the very best and the most admired, so it was clearly created and fashioned in a very wonderful way. Now this being definitely had a life of its own, total life of its own. But it did have a negativity underneath it all, despite its apparent physical demeanour of great beauty and great fascination, and could literally seduce and entice many others to admire and follow this being, to where many believed that it was better than the original creator source. Can a master create a being that is better than itself? Well, that's, some might believe this. Certainly some masters can be surpassed by their pupils. At least that's what we are told in this reality. That is what we are told in this reality. Because, as I say, it's a mind game reality, so it's quite possible that this is not so. But in this reality, we believe it to be so, and we have physical examples of it down through history even. So I'm going to go with it, but doesn't mean I believe it. But I have believed it for a lifetime, so we'll stick with it. Matrix is getting very noisy actually at the moment, so I'm going to have great trouble concentrating. fact, I'm surprised I got this far, really. But, because it's a matrix, you see, and a matrix operates under negativity on a regular basis. Because the matrix entities are of a negative vibration and negative force, so they delight in the negative. That feeds them and nourishes them. Humans are meant to be of a higher vibration, so that is the opposite. That's why they say you should meditate. But in a matrix, as I've said before, you can't meditate. You can only meditate if you are a matrix disciple, because frequency and vibration is always going to be negative at the human level, because the humans operate and feed and are mainly the source for the matrix. I've gone back onto that, which is like part of another video. So I'm all over the place as usual. Oh, here we go. Now let me see. Back to the Garden of Eden. So we're back to the Garden of Eden, back to the original earth. Now, this other being did not approve of the creator source making Adam, because it was a threat to this being's position. This being did not like competition. If you're second to none and you're almost regarded as a god, you don't particularly want the source to create something that it might find closer to itself and closer to its heart, if you want to look at it that way. Because I suppose it could be a bit like the comparison between dare I say it's not a good one, but a comparison between an adopted child and one you have of your own DNA or your own body and conceive in a spiritual, natural way. And even that there are 3 different versions of that too, because you can conceive many different ways. And they all have a different connotation, depending on your belief, and most would probably say it doesn't matter. I think it does matter, but that's only because if you're coming from a particular belief or a particular idea. It's not really a belief, it's just an idea. Sorry about the noise. But I'm sorry about it too, but at any rate, the Garden of Eden, right? Now we have in the Garden of Eden, we have Adam, who was originally not looked kindly upon by the second to none demigod, you could say. Let's say demigod. Can I use that term? Because it wasn't from source, but it was second to none in the heaven. Now, this being was not keen on the idea of another creation, but it happened, and it could not stop that. But what did happen was, in my fairy tale, this being befriended Adam. And although it resented Adam's creation, Adam looked kindly and in admiration on this being. So this being lost its resentment of Adam to some extent, because this being was being looked upon and admired by Adam also, as it was by many in heaven and by the source originally, and still was by the source up to this point, I would imagine. Because I suppose the source was like, this is just another being, but, you are still special, you are still what you are. There's no need to feel less or to feel resentment or to get envy going. But this did happen. But this being did get on quite well with Adam and liked Adam, because Adam was different to it. Adam was not as beautiful or as seductive as this being, strangely enough. It was more authentic and more natural and closer to source, but not as physically or as mentally appealing as the second to none being. It was not. Adam was more real and had much potential. So this being still held its position, and Adam himself got on very well with this being. And this being secretly liked Adam. It liked Adam's masculinity. This being was not of the masculine genre, shall we say. This being was of a duality. This is a duality God. Even though this duality God in our reality has become a God of war and has become more of the lower frequency. The frequency has gone down and down because you can change. This is like I was saying in my Lulu, the Archon Spirit Doll video. And I'm losing this here, I know, because I'm confusing you all over the place. I'm even confusing myself. But, when I said in the previous video, and if you haven't seen the previous video, that's confusing you even more, seeing I've gone on to creation story. When I was the child, and that moment of peace and contentment with myself on that beach with the Archon Spirit Doll, it was really just a oneness with myself and with nature and with the world. But it was really essentially just a peace with myself, to where the world did not matter so much. And it seemed it did feel like that, but in reality it was just an acceptance of yourself. Because as a child, that seemed reasonable. But it still only happened in that one moment, not before and not since. I think I've lost myself here in this. But you see, that was an acceptance of what you were, instead of changing all the time. This evolving thing. There was no need to evolve, because that moment was knowing that you were meant to be as you were. And it was like there was no competition, there was no envy, there was no comparison. And that was like Adam, you see. He was perfect in himself, but he didn't compare himself with the other being. He liked the other being, but the other being was different to Adam. But the being compared. But because Adam admired this being, should I say, as much as everyone else had, he was very happy to befriend Adam and to get on quite fine with him. Even though he was not of Adam's kind, and Adam was not of his kind. I've lost you here, I know I've lost myself here, I've gone wrong. But essentially, I'll have to forget about Lulu, the Archon doll, and that moment. But all I'm saying is that different beings are different. Different types, they're created different, they are different. This being was different to Adam. Adam was a masculine being of his type, a human type. This other being was duality, perfect in its mixture, but it was a mixture. It was, and fascinating to all for this. But Adam got on very well with this being, okay? And this being got on very well with Adam. So everything now was once again hunky-dory. The heaven was happy, the earth was happy, the creator life source was happy, everyone in heaven was happy, the second to none being was happy, Adam was happy. But Adam did wonder why he was the only one of its kind, because all the other creatures that were around him on the earth had mates of their own kind and multiplied too, whereas he was singular. He had no real... he was immortal. Because he had been given that from the creator source. Now, then the creator source thought that maybe he should give Adam a mate. Eve, what we call Eve, Adam and Eve, that is the scenario that we're a bit familiar with. I'm actually not that familiar with it, to be honest, but I'm still making a fairy tale out of it, whatever. But at any rate, I'm disappointed in my own fairy tale. This should have been a good one, because I think that it's about everything, isn't it? Whereas most fairy tales are just about little, and like I say, I'm such a poor singer of the song or of the fairy tale. Now, the creator, God being, decided to give Adam a mate, to create a mate, because there was no mate for Adam, so it decided to create a mate. This mate would be different to Adam. It wouldn't be a duplicate of Adam. It would be a different, of the similar material, of the substance and the same spirit type of thing, but a different version. And this being, this Eve, was created with the idea of multiplying also. Not just a singular mate for Adam, to where he had a mate to where they could just live happily ever after, forget forever, but a female to create more of its kind. Now, as you can imagine, the second to none being had accepted Adam and found Adam not a threat, because Adam was different to this being. Adam did not have all the charisma and all the power of seduction that this being had, even though it was of the highest caliber, shall we say. So the creator source of all created Eve, decided in heaven to create Eve, a mate for Adam, and did so. But Eve was different to Adam. Not only was she a mate for Adam, but they could conceive other Adams and Eves. That potential was there. Now, Eve was created and was given to Adam. And Adam was very pleased. Adam was ecstatic. Adam could not believe that he had been given this creation of his own kind. He could not believe that such a being could be so beautiful. Eve to Adam was incomparable in her beauty, in her charm, in her charisma, in everything about her, was all that he could have ever dreamed of. And he felt blessed and was very happy. The other being, the second to none being, was not pleased with Eve. Whereas Adam was a friend, and Adam was not really competing with this being, because Adam was of the masculine physical appearance. He was not beautiful. He was beautiful in the eyes of the Creator because it was of that spirit or of that type and natural, etc. But not beautiful in the eyes of most others, or even the other being. He knew that the other being knew that its beauty was more than Adam's. But Eve, in the creation of Eve, this being was being eclipsed in its attractiveness to all around. It wasn't just Adam that was totally besotted, which was normal for him because this was a mate for him and it was of his kind or his species. But Eve surpassed this being in its beauty, even though they were still different. And Adam was no longer as interested in playing, shall we say, almost with this other being. I mean, it probably didn't reject it, but at the same time, it was now, this is how it happens sometimes in relationships, as we know. Someone else comes along that someone finds more attractive, and then the other person falls by the wayside or isn't given as much attention. And this being is second to none, so it's not going to accept that it is relegated to third place. Not by Adam and not by anyone else. But this is essentially what was appearing to happen, or at least in the mind of this being. Whether this was still an overreaction or an unnecessary way to think, who knows? That's not something I would know, but it can happen. And it's happened to me in my life too. We've all been jealous and envious of others, and sometimes it can really get to you. Sometimes it can create such negativity that you will act and do things that are destructive, anti-life, and that you may or may not regret down the track depending on how spiritually advanced you are. But if you are not very spiritually advanced and you really believe yourself to be a god and actually believe that you are the main one, because you are so admired, then now to be put into third place, or at least in your own mind, doesn't mean whether it was even real. May not have been. This being could have overreacted to the circumstances, but certainly Adam was so enthralled by his mate that Eve was meant to be his partner and his mate. So, of course, he was going to play more with Eve and saw Eve as, instead of seeing Eve is different to the other being, but special because it was a mate. The other being certainly saw it as being totally eclipsed and being pushed down. Now, Adam himself would probably have still been friendly with the other being. Maybe. In my fairy tale, he's going to still be friendly. But like if you get a wife, sometimes you may not hang out as much with your friends, you know. And who knows what relationship any of these people had. I'm not going to go into that because I don't want to go into relationships. I could make up my fairy tale accordingly, but it becomes too, I should really do that because it makes a more interesting tale, but trying to keep it simple and I ramble on too long anyway. So, yeah, the jealousy and resentment and envy even came in then because it was like, hey, now I accepted Adam, but now I've got this Eve who is incomparable in her beauty and attractiveness, and she is so fair. By fair, we mean, above all others. The fairness implies that this one was of light, just as the second to none was a being of great light and luminosity, to where many would be prepared to bow down to this being as the sole God almost, because it's a bit like on this earth where we have different idols, different stars, shall we say. And in my particular case, I will see some stars as brighter than others. In other words, I would prefer some idols or some stars, as over others. I would say that some, I might say, you become very prejudiced and you say, oh, that person is incomparable next to the other one. The other, pales by comparison. It's all opinion. Beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. But if you acknowledge something and give it to someone else and say, oh, you are, the most beautiful, you are the fairest in the land as Snow White, as the mirror told the wicked queen, or the queen, she only became wicked because iniquity and envy came into her. She became wicked by that because she also became resentful and felt that her position was in threat. She couldn't just say, look, I'm the queen, I am beautiful. Okay, so some people think this Snow White is special. Maybe I shouldn't worry about it, but she couldn't do that. And it was the same with this being. Just couldn't accept that the circumstances had changed, that heaven had changed, and that earth had been created with other beings that became quite important to everyone else, to heaven. And the situation went from bad to worse, you could say. So, this being then became very resentful of Eve. And because it was a very advanced mentally being, just as it had befriended Adam, and Adam saw no problem with this being, because this being did not, if you admired it and gave it all, it did not show a negative side. It had a negative side, like we all do. But, yourself, or like my father used to say, he used to actually say this, he used to say, look, if you give everything to someone, if everything is going well for someone, there's no reason that someone should behave bad or should be angry or be hateful. He used to say, some people are only good while the going is good. Some people, in fact a lot of people, are only good while the going is good. In other words, while everything is going great for them, they're the most loving, nice people. But you put them in adversity and you will see a dark side. And that's what he always used to say, because he knew that. But this is more so for some beings than for others. So this second to none being was fine while it was admired and while everything was going good and while heaven looked up to him and even while Adam was befriending him and admiring him too and accepting him as a friend. Not so bad. But Eve come along, so Adam's took his total admiration of this being and given it now to Eve. And Eve is giving her attention to Adam because that's all she knows. This is her mate. She's been provided. It's of her own kind. She likes Adam. She admires Adam. She thinks Adam is physically very attractive to her. She's content. But this being, because it is very intelligent and very of the mind also, advanced in many ways, thinks that in order to regain its position, it must break up the happy party somehow. And it gets resentful and angry at the Creator Source and at Adam, and certainly very negative towards Eve. Because Eve is like the final straw. It's like, hey, I don't know what to do now. But this being is not without its resources. So it thinks Eve is with Adam, but I am still this very charismatic, superior being that everyone admires and has admired until you come along, because your beauty is beyond compare. Adam is besotted and many others are seeing this. It may or may not ruin my existence, but I feel that it does. So, and I'm angry at this situation. I'm angry at the Creator too. And I cannot be Eve. But maybe I can entice Eve to like me as I have Adam. Maybe I can pull Eve from Adam. Why not? And this being decides to befriend Eve. Eve is happy with Adam, so it's going to take a lot because Eve herself is very beautiful, so she does not necessarily need to be with a mate or to go with another being that is particularly beautiful, because she has that in herself. And Adam is a perfect mate for her in other areas. So this being can't use its usual charms on Eve, because Eve is not lacking in the department that many others might think they are, and why they have admired this being. But Eve, as all beings, have their weak spots, and this is the Garden of Eden, so there's a lot of innocence. They have not encountered these things before. Anyway, to cut a long story short, as they say, Eve is induced by this being to go against the source in some way, shall we say, to have a liaison in some way. Almost like, Adam and Eve are married, they're happy, but someone else comes along and says to Adam or Eve, I shall be your mistress, and this is tempting. And Eve was tempted. Adam knew of this, and he was upset and frightened that Eve would leave him for the other being. So the other being induced Eve to turn against the source and to leave Adam, potentially. Adam was frightened that he would lose Eve, his most beautiful woman, that he had now received and was the only future. But there were conditions to living in the earth realm. These conditions were put down to protect Adam and Eve, for that matter, because the source was aware that certain things are a benefit and certain things aren't. This was a different realm, and the second to none being had by this time become rebellious in its nature and resented the source, resented its own creator, and resented Adam and resented the whole scenario, because this being had become a lot more unbalanced in some ways in its thinking. This is what they'd say when they say iniquity. And without me sounding like I say it's all iniquity, but basically what you do end up having now in this fairy tale is Adam chasing after Eve and the other being. And saying, whatever Eve wants, whatever Eve decides, I will do. And Eve, on the other hand, has been seduced by this being, so she's like, I will do what this being wants. Let's make this world of this being's world. We don't need the creator now because it is a separate region, and we've got into a confused state. So we will go along with the second to none's idea, and we will worship this being as we do now, and we will make our own world. But in doing this changed the whole earth and the whole frequency. But essentially, the aim of the second to none being did not change, because it became then, when the earth was created, where this being also decided to be a creator being. But because it was angry at it losing its position and losing its acknowledgement, and like I say, secretly wanted to be a total God, then it became to where it was like, well, I know everything, I understand how things work, so I shall create my own domain. I shall create my own creations just as the God has done. So it became like Pinocchio, where I wanted to be a real boy, but was not, but was prepared to do everything to mimic being a real boy, to imitate the master, the father, and other beings that were like the master and the father and the creator. Like Pinocchio's father, the master wood chipsman. He created with wood, even though he himself was not made of wood. I think I'll have to fold up this video. I've lost my train of thought. I've went on too long, and this is the poorest fairy tale on what is essentially a rather good story. But because it is something that is not something that I'm real familiar with, it's not a fairy tale or even a reality or a book or a scenario that I'm real familiar with. But I think it has merit. If you look at even the world now as it is, where, we have beings that emulate humans but take from humans in order to be their own kind, if you want to look at it that way, because the God entity uses beings that they have the same vessel as a human being, but they're still different to the creator source. They're not. They don't live on their own. They only live as a collective. They're a collective entity. And they are the collective entity of the God entity that is this Earth matrix. They are what the original humans were, like a representation of the original creator God entity, but these are a representation of the second to number one's being. They're the representation of that God. They're the collective consciousness of that being. As human beings are a bit more like the collective consciousness of the creator source being. But really, it's still different, because they're not in need of that collective consciousness. They're individual entities. They weren't created like that, whereas the other one is created in a different way, and I have not got train of thought enough to explain that. Not that I probably could explain it very well anyway. But essentially I say it's artificial versus natural. It's authentic versus something that is manipulated. It's something that is continually improved and continually changed, for the better or for the worse, but mostly for the worst, because it's a negative thing. It's a negative frequency, so it's actually for the worse, but it's mainly worse for the human, because the human is the better part of it, but it does not benefit the human individually. Just like Adam went with Eve, but Eve went with the other being. So Eve was going away from creating from the natural source and creating the way it was meant to be, to create a collective consciousness of natural beings, if you want to look at it that way, which I don't think that's putting it very well, because I think that, personally, I just think there's a difference between a collective consciousness that is technology, which is like all connected, but can't function without that has no power or no real ability on its own. But as a whole, it functions, and it doesn't think individually, really. It tends to only operate, like a group. It's a group consensus, a group thinking, a group program, a group, it's not really even a consciousness, I don't think, personally. I think it's an imitation consciousness myself. I think it's an imitation, a fraud, a fake, an artificial. It's like Pinocchio. It's not a real boy, but it wants to be, it emulates that, and it thinks that if it does that, it can be an improvement even. But either way, it wouldn't matter, because that would just be its existence. Whatever exists, exists. So, it doesn't have to be whether it's better or worse or whatever. It's just how it is. But the being, the God entity, it's essential to this being, because this being wanted to create, because it wanted to surpass the creator being in every way. So everything that was created and done, it will imitate and try to do better, or at least appear to, and at least get acknowledgement that way. I mean, like I said, on this earth I might worship many idols. Those idols may or may not be better than me. They may or may not be better than you. Like I say, when I was on the beach with the Lulu Spirit Archon doll, I felt complete and content in myself. In that moment, I did not compare myself to my idols. I did not see myself as less than a god. It did not matter. I was content. That's how we're meant to be, I would think, and, did not feel ill at ease. The matrix and the God entity has a world that makes for that friction, for that separation, to where you don't feel content in yourself. You feel you're always looking for something else. You're always looking for the other half. You're always looking to be better. You're competing. You're not good enough, or you don't fit in, or you're not part of the matrix. It's never like you just were born, you were here, you exist, and that's all that matters. And whatever you are is okay. In fact, it is all you need. You feel unique in yourself. You don't become like the Archon God entity, where he became, threatened by Eve, or threatened by, or insecure, thinking that he should be number one. All this became where the mind became confused somehow. Instead of just saying, I am what I am, and it is good. That's something that we all lose, and I lost it soon after. And this is because you're in a matrix, so they don't want any child to just say, hey, I am created, I am here, and I am fine, I'm okay, I'm just all I need to be. I don't need to worry about other beings, other human beings. I don't need to compete. I don't need to worry about that. but I can do what I want. I can, you know. But you see, that is something that doesn't stay with any child or any human being as you grow up, because the matrix is your mindset. You're never just allowed to be, because the matrix rules. If you weren't in a matrix, if you were back in the Garden of Eden, originally they were much more allowed to be. All life forms were allowed to be, and they were happy to be. But like I say, that was where that story comes in, where the second to none being come in to confuse things, because it got confused. This being got confused. Whether it should have or not, it probably shouldn't have. It was content, but it's something that can happen. I don't know why these things happen. I don't know why it happened with me. Well, I do, because I think we're in the matrix, but maybe it can happen, even in a perfect scenario, because if that is if you allow that to come into your mind, I don't know how all that happens. I mean, I blame it all on the matrix, as you know. But this thing would have happened in heaven before the matrix. So, even in heaven, things can go wrong, I would imagine. And does appear to be, but it's more or less how wrong they go, see, the matrix, I don't think, maybe it's even interesting to have a few things go wrong, but when everything goes wrong, everything becomes a total negative scenario, then you have a big problem. But that's when you have everyone, essentially going dark and allowing the mind parasites, the negativity, the vibration. In other words, human beings become changed from being essentially what should be a high vibrational being into a low vibrational being, as the God entity is a low vibrational being. Now, whether this was always so, or whether these are things that have happened down through the years, obviously there was some always there. But rather than to create the idea then is to make the matrix where the being creates beings that are low vibration of the same as itself, a representation of itself, its offspring, as the Creator originally put Adam and then Eve as representations. They failed. They have failed because they decided to follow the second to none and become representations of that Creator being, which means they transform themselves into something different at a spiritual and sometimes even at a physical level, because the spirit can change the physical. Like if I think about when I was on the beach with Lulu, I was at ease with myself and my body and felt fairly whole, shall we say. That was the kind of feeling of it. Now, as the years go by, that wholeness disappears and negativity towards yourself and others creeps in. So, that acceptance and contentment with what you are is lost. So then, you become unhappy then, you see. So that sublime moment of completeness and contentment, that's gone. Instead, that becomes replaced by discontent and ill at ease and no doubt, a lacking, imbalance. But that's a bad word too, because that word can be taken in a wrong light. but essentially it is just where you are, and it's everything's right. And but this imbalance that we have now is a creation of the matrix and the God entity. It's an imbalance. It's a creation, though. It's not a natural state, and that is because we have went away from being natural, and now we create what we want ourselves, or the being creates what it wants. And this is all just a matter of opinion. What is whether it is a benefit or not. But if I think about myself, it's like, as I said before, we haven't evolved, we've devolved. Because if I felt better when I was 9 years old in that moment than what I do now, that's hardly advancing, is it? So, and yet I didn't know anything then either. So, so it's not just about being technical and knowing everything, as I say. It's not necessary to know things. In fact, in the matrix now, the more you know, in some ways the knowledge can bring the vibration down, which is what's happened in my case. But that's because it's not a natural world. It's a different realm. And it is now a different realm run by a different deity, it's a totally different thing. And I think I have to close off because I'm getting too much negative vibration. It's not just that I can't concentrate, but essentially I'm confusing myself too, because it is not a natural, authentic world we live in now. It is not it's not of a frequency that is conducive to a human being in that state when I was a child, or to any state that is like that. At best, your frequency will be a little bit better than really low. Look, I'm not saying that some people can't get above it, but I would say that one would have to be rather careful, because I don't think that as a human being, you can seriously exist in this matrix earth and be seriously in that state. And actually exist, really. But maybe you can, but you would have to be very oblivious to your surroundings. And I still say that how do you rise above a negative vibration? So this is what I'm saying. So we do live in a matrix, and it is a video game. So,